We have a number of people signing in, so thank you, everybody. We'll be beginning in a few minutes. We had quite a number of people interested in this subject matter, and we're glad that you can join us. Let a few more people in here. We're pleased to be able to offer these webinars. If you go to our website, novaregion.org, in the Resilience Hub, you'll see a link for resilience planning, and there you can find some of the other webinars that we have run. We still have people signing in. Again, welcome everybody. We had well over 100 folks signed up for this webinar, so I want to give everyone a little bit of time to log in. We're excited that you could join us. We have two great speakers, Noah Nakange from Equinix and Preston Bryant from McGuire Woods Consulting. Okay, I'm going to start here. And again, welcome everybody. I'm Bob Lucero, Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. I'm pleased to welcome you to this webinar about district energy and the potential for application in Northern Virginia. Um, doesn't seem that long ago, but 2008, 2009, Northern Virginia Regional Commission worked with our local government partners in Arlington and Loudoun County on community energy planning. And one of the main subject areas of that plan was the application of district energy in both those counties. And in Loudoun, a lot of that focus was on what opportunities were there with respect to district energy utilizing excess heat from data centers. A year or two after that, NVRC, through a grant, was able to hire the services of McGuire Woods Consulting to do a legal analysis of the Code of Virginia. Those of you who are from Virginia know that the code is very prescriptive, and we wanted to make sure that there was nothing in the code that would prevent district energy from being utilized in Northern Virginia. And Preston will be presenting first, and he will be giving an update on his research. Fast forward to this summer, was excited to see that Equinix announced their heat export program. As far as I know, it's the first announcement in the United States of a company, a data center company, interested in working with local planning agencies in developing and implementing district energy in the United States. There are other data center operators who are doing this in the EU and other places, but this is the first company, and we congratulate them on making this offer. And as a follow-up, we created a map of all the data centers and potential data centers in Loudoun in Northern Virginia, and we also put the various municipal buildings that are near them for perhaps a pilot for district energy. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Preston Bryant, who will provide an update to his legal analysis. Preston, we're thankful that you're here. I will get off my camera and I will um, let you run the show.
Thank you, Bob, very much. And Bob Lazaro and Dale Medeiros of Northern Virginia Regional Commission have been working on and promoting district energy systems in Virginia for a long time. And they asked McGuire Woods Consulting, McGuire Woods Law Firm, to do a white paper for them some years ago. And so I will be efficiently going through that. Next slide. First, the disclosure. McGuire Woods Consulting, we're a subsidiary of the McGuire Woods Law Firm. In the consulting group, we don't provide legal advice. I am not a lawyer, so nothing herein is to be taken as legal advice. Next. Very quickly, I'll move through this maybe in about 10 minutes or so. This is my quick outline to show DESs in Virginia, how you can do them, the ownership structures, how you can contract for third-party operations, things like that. And let me say also, I'm very pleased to be joined doing this with Noah Nakonge of Equinix. Equinix has been a leader in Virginia data center industry for 30 years. They were one of the first data centers in Virginia quite some time ago. So I'm very pleased to be joined by Noah. Next slide. As Bob said, McGuire Woods Consulting and the McGuire Woods Law Firm did this white paper quite some time ago, but we have looked to see that all the code sections are still relevant. There hasn't been any substantial changes. So the white paper is still generally accurate, and you can find it on the NVRC website. Go to the Resilience Hub tab, Resilience Hub, and you'll see the paper under that tab. Next. So district energy systems in Virginia, this is just one slide on what many of you here may already know. First, a district energy system providing heating or cooling for multiple buildings from a central plant connected by pipes. I think we all get that. You can produce steam and hot water, and in some cases electricity, and we'll talk about that. It can be a lot of environmental and economic benefits from a district energy system, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Next. First, let me just say what I think a lot of you already know and what Noah will talk about. District energy systems are commonplace in many countries around the world, especially in Europe. In the United States, and all of this is in the white paper, we give some brush to it. There are well-known, long-established district energy systems in cities like St. Paul, Minnesota, Nashville, Tennessee, Denver, Colorado, Philadelphia. In Virginia, however, there isn't a great history of established district energy systems. There are small examples. I think, don't hold me to this, but I think Quantico Marine Base may have a district energy system. Also, the city of Harrisonburg in Virginia, where James Madison University is, Harrisonburg has a partnership with JMU regarding municipal waste to energy facility and generating steam and transferring steam to the university. They had that for a long time, and I'm assuming it's still in place. In Virginia, again, the white paper looked at the legal framework, and as I say here, a district energy system in Virginia can legally be established and operated. It might be a little complicated, but it's not insurmountable. Let me underscore that. It's not insurmountable. It can be done. There are various ways to legally, lawfully put together, establish a district energy system in Virginia and operate it. And we'll talk about those options next. So in Virginia, I'll refer to the SCC. That's the State Corporation Commission. It is Virginia's Public Utilities Commission. There's a three-member body. They're considered judges in Virginia. They have great power. They have jurisdiction over um, um, banking and corporations and railroads and telecommunication systems. And under utilities, it's also energy. And under that, it would include gas, electric, and in some cases, water and wastewater systems. So when I refer to the SCC, it is our Public Utilities Commission. So just a very quick one-slide primer. I try to make this as easy as possible. If you're a public entity, a county, city, town, or an authority, you can develop and operate a thermal-only DES without any state corporation commission regulation at all. If you're a private entity, and this is where it gets a little wonky, you can develop and own and operate a thermal only, a heat only DES without SEC oversight for the construction, But the SEC will have a role when it comes to rates and service for cooled water and potentially other things. We'll talk about that a little bit. That might need to be clarified. Whether it's public or private, And if you want to generate electricity, um, that is going to be subject to the State Corporation Commission regulation. And you would have to obtain what we call a CPCN, or a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. This is your license and your approval to indeed construct such a electric generating facility. And then if it's a privately owned DES and you're to generate electricity, you're subject to the SCC oversight, and you'll be permitted to generate power for your own use and under certain circumstances. And if you're public, you can also self-generate and sell to others. You could sell, for example, Loudon Prince William could do a DES in conjunction with data centers, capture the heat, generate some electricity, and sell that power, for example, I just cite this for example, to Northern Virginia Electric Cooperative, or to Dominion, as the case may be, just kind of examples. Next. So the next few slides, I'm going to briefly go over ownership options: public ownership, private and or mixed use ownership, and then how you also could contract for third party operations. So Virginia is what's called a Dillon Rule state, meaning the legislature grants localities, counties, cities, and towns, and authorities only those powers that are prescribed in state law, outside of some general law. But anything more specific than general law, the legislature has, it's a little bit of a mother may I system. The legislature has to grant Loudon or Prince William or other localities a specific provision to carry out something. So that's why I say in the first bullet, a public entity, a county, city, town, or authority, you got to have express authority in Virginia law to own or operate a DES, and we'll get into some of that laws already there. So there are a number of provisions in law that allow give localities the authority to own and operate waterworks, gas works, electric plants, and quote unquote other public utilities, including chilled water. And there's the code site. There are a number of municipalities, a dozen or so, for example, that have their own electric plants, and they power their locality, provide their own electricity. So there is authority to do this. The provision there that says and other public utilities, one can argue, perhaps pretty easily, that heated water and chilled air and water, chilled and heated air also fit that definition. It might need to be clarified just to be absolutely clear, but we think there's sufficient clarity already. But that's something to talk about perhaps with state legislators. I want to focus on two public options. One is a service district, and one is a sanitary district that can be created under public law for public entities to do this. Next slide. So on the service district, there's the code section, and it can be created by one or more localities. One locality could do it, or for example, Prince William and Loudon could get together and create a service district. And under the definition of governmental services that district would provide includes heat, power, and gas. And this fits within the definition. The advantageous features of creating a service district is that, and these are important to both financial and operational models, you can require the tenants to connect. That's important. You have the power, a service district would have the power of eminent domain. In Virginia, sometimes that's a four-letter word. You tend to try to voluntarily work with landowners to create such, and it requires some education, of course. Also important to the financial and operational model is that you can levy a tax for the expenses and the charges of building and maintaining and running a DES. Nope, go back. Go back. There you go. Stay there. And you also the service district also has the power to contract to construct and operate and such. Important to note, a service district does not have the power to issue debt. Does not. Now, with that, Go to the next slide. This is on a sanitary district as opposed to a service district, and it has many of the same features as the service district. You can require the tenants to connect. You can acquire real estate and put all of that together. You have, purchase powers of land, and you can condemn. Again, that's not always the best route. You have the authority to contract just like under a service district, and it has all those other um, similar features. Plus, and this is the difference, sanitary district can issue debt. It can issue bonds for this, but the state law says the issuing the bonds, the amount can't exceed 18% of the assessed value of the real estate in the district. So that's kind of a governor on how much debt you can issue. Next slide. Under private ownership, the previous two examples, service districts and sanitary districts, that was public ownership. Under private ownership, you can do you could form a special purpose entity. An LLC or a corporation could form a special purpose entity for the purpose of owning and running a district energy system. Let me first say on the procurement side, how you would do this as a private developer. Virginia has a quite unique law called the Public-Private Education Facilities and Infrastructure Act. Legislators and local governments know it as PPEA. And there have been about 200 PPEAs done across Virginia over the last 20 years. I served in the legislature, it seems like an eon ago, and I was one of the sponsors of the PPEA law. And it has various the definition of qualifying project. It includes schools and telecom systems and libraries and water and wastewater facilities and public safety facilities and a lot more. But there's also this category on utilities and telecommunication systems and other infrastructure. And a district energy system could be proposed by a developer in collaboration with a local government or two local governments or more to propose via the PPEA developing a district energy system. And then whether it's done publicly or privately or some hybrid remains to be seen. But under private ownership, you would likely develop an LLC or a corporation to do it. Next slide. I'm trying to move along pretty quickly. Contractual relationships, and I'm nearing the end. So let's face it, there have not been a lot of DESs in Virginia, and there's not a whole lot of in Virginia expertise. So whether it's a public entity or a private entity that would establish and own and operate DES, I mentioned that under the service district and the sanitary district, you can contract with a third party to operate this, and that might be a pretty wise thing to do given the lack of deep experience in Virginia on DESs. But remember, if we're talking about the data center industry, and Noah will get into this, they bring a lot of expertise to heat exchange and monetizing heat and creating a system that is economically and environmentally beneficial to any number of parties. So if you did contract for the operations, I've got a few things there that should be likely considered in such a contracted commercial operations, fixed costs and energy use and exchange and environmental credits and the like. That's go to the next. Yep. And just continuation, if a DES does run a CHP system that generates thermal and electricity, then you could, what I said earlier, you could sell that electricity to a Dominion or Novec or something like that, and it would be done likely under a power purchase agreement. And all of that is in the 54-page white paper that is on the NVRC website. It does a pretty deep dive in the legal analysis of all of this. Next slide. And this is my last slide, just the summary conclusion, not to bury the lead. Yes, you can do a DES in Virginia. It might be a little complicated, but it's not insurmountable. It can be done. It can be publicly owned. In that case, consider a service district or a sanitary district if one or two localities, counties, I'll cite Loudoun, Prince William as the obvious example, but could be anybody. They could get together and do that. Privately owned, you could set up an LLC or a corporation to do it. And whether it's public or privately owned, you could contract with a third party to expertly run the district energy system. So the last slide is my contact information, and I'm happy to take calls or emails. I don't profess to know every last answer, but I will work with others to try to get an answer to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Preston. And I just wanted, for those who joined us late, we will be able to answer questions if you put them in the chat. The video and presentations will be put on our website by first thing Thursday morning. So you'll be able to see this video and also download the slides. So I am going to next turn it over to Noah from Equinix.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Robert and Dale, for inviting me to speak here. And also, it's been great to connect with you, Preston, as well. Next slide, please.
Yeah, give me a second, Noah. For some reason, there's a user error on my part, but I
No
will get
worries.
I'll get there in a moment.
Sure. While Robert's working on the slides, as Preston mentioned, Equinix actually started out in Virginia, so it's the birthplace. I happen to be here in Northern Virginia today. And for those who don't know, Equinix has 16 international business exchange, what we call data centers, essentially, out in this area, out of global data center footprint of 260 data centers. So this is definitely a key market for us. And yeah, so very excited to be talking about the potential for heat export in the light of the sheer amount of data centers that exist in this region. And what I was really looking to do today is use the example from what we're doing in Europe for our heat export program. And hopefully there'll be some things that will be useful for this context and how to make district energy a reality from data centers in Northern Virginia. So next slide, please. Yeah, and a little bit about myself. So I've been in Equinix about a year and a half, and I've also been working in the space of heat, heat decarbonization, heat networks for about 15 years, but in various different organizations. I've worked in an energy utility, which was looking for heat from industry to supply these district energy networks. I've worked in consulting as well and worked in various roles. So yeah, this is an area that I'm very passionate about and very keen to see these sort of projects happen. So what I'm going to cover today is just to provide a baseline of what is heat export when we talk about exporting heat from our data centers, what is energy, and then also to outline why is it a valuable thing to do for various stakeholders, why is it valuable for the community, why is it valuable for a data center operator, and why is it valuable for our customers. Provide a brief overview of the infrastructure that's involved to get a sense of the various, what needs to be installed essentially to make this happen. And then provide a bit of an overview where we as Equinix are doing this already, the heat export into decentralized energy, and then also discuss what are the ingredients for making a successful project. Next slide, please. Okay, wonderful. So this infographic provides a simple overview of data center heat export. So starting on the left-hand side, when we power our customers' IT equipment using renewable and clean sources of energy, residual heat is produced. Now, typically this heat will be rejected to the atmosphere. However, with heat export, this heat is captured and then transferred via heat exchanger to a third party, typically an energy utility or heat network operator, who can take this heat, which is at about 25 to 30 degrees Celsius, and raise it to about 60 to 90 degrees Celsius using a heat pump, and then pumping this. Then this water is pumped basically via buried underground pipework to the community. This can be to heat homes, offices, swimming pools, etc. That's a very sort of high level overview of how heat export works. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why this is a good thing for the community. So Equinix has a 100% renewable energy target. I think we're at 96% today, and we're on track to hitting that 100% renewable target in the next couple of years. So using the heat, the residual heat from the Equinix data centers means that district energy systems effectively have access to renewable heat, very important in the context of reducing carbon emissions in the community. Another really important factor, which we saw a lot actually in Europe with the energy, was addressing energy insecurity. So this is about reducing reliance on fossil fuels and more about making use of resources that are already within the local economy. Lower cost heat as well. So a lot of data centers will provide the heat at low or no cost. Um, as Equinix, speaking for Equinix, we're not looking at heat export as a way to make more money, for example. It's more that it's the right thing to do. So we will make that heat available for low or no cost. In terms of circular economy, which I've alluded to, it's about making best use of resource that's already in the region. So why not put that to use instead of um, burning other fuels to generate heat? Next slide, please. So in terms of the benefit more towards Equinix and our customers, having heat export is a relatable sustainability initiative. A lot of the general public will understand the benefit of that. Sometimes the general public don't understand what data centers do and digitalization, and heat export is a way to make that relatable and for to improve the image of data centers more broadly. And this is also positive for legislators, so they'll also understand the value of it and are more likely to promote digital growth as a result of that. As it gives us a competitive edge, sustainability is part of our DNA at Equinix, and so running a heat export program, which, as far as I'm aware, no other data center operator has a similar program. Yeah, that's just part of our DNA. It's the right thing to do. It helps with securing permits faster as well and reducing the time to get to market as a result. There's typically can be an economic benefit as well. I have to stress that this has to be for the right project. So it's not heat export isn't a one size fits all. It won't work for every single data center or situation. However, for a well-designed project, there should be a reduction in electricity use of the data center. And as a rule of thumb, investing in the infrastructure required to make the data center able to export heat represents only about 1 to 2% of the data center build cost. So it's relatively small amount of money for quite an impactful result. And I've already mentioned the circular economy, so I won't go over that again. Other than to say, yeah, low cost heat to warm homes and cut carbon is a good thing, I would say. Next slide, please. So yeah, so what's the value to our customers, especially our largest hyperscale lease customers? So for a bit of context, Equinix has two main business models. One is a traditional co-location, and what that means is you can have lots of different customers who occupy the same building and have different bits of space. With hyperscale lease customers, that's a much different proposition. So we may build the data centers, but then a big player such as Google or Microsoft or Amazon would come in and occupy the building and basically rent it out over the long term. So this is particularly valuable because in those situations, the customer is the one who will be directly benefiting from any energy savings, reduction in electricity use from the heat export. It's great for enhancing their reputation. Whenever these big players do these projects, they like to talk about them and publicize them. It's great for keeping ahead of regulations, especially in Europe, where the regulations are very stringent now. There's now new regulations on reporting for sustainability for data centers, and included in that is the amount of heat that's exported from data centers now needs to be reported every year. In country like Germany, they've released the energy efficiency law, which is going to require new data centers built from 2028 to be exporting heat to the local community. And we expect similar type of legislation to be coming up in Europe. So this is a really important consideration in Europe at the moment. And yeah, for the data centers, sorry, for the customers, it's a low risk thing because we as Equinix will do the hard work of talking to the various players involved, whether it's the local authorities, whether it's the energy utilities. So we'll do the hard work to kind of bring the people around the table. And this is something that's scalable because this can happen across multiple cities as well. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of what the infrastructure looks like. I'm conscious that maybe not everybody's familiar with district energy. And so starting on the left-hand side, at the top left, you've got our data center. And then at the bottom left, you've got the blue kind of rectangular shape. That's a heat exchanger. And what that means, or what that allows to happen is a separation of the water in the data center system from the water that would then carry the heat from the data center into the community. So that means that the data center operations remain protected and unaffected, and similarly for the district energy system as well. So that's yeah, what a heat exchanger looks like. And then in the middle, you've got a picture of a couple of heat pumps. So those would be about 6 megawatts of heat pump capacity. So this is a picture from a scheme up in Ireland as it happens. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a picture of buried pipework. So once the warmed up water from the data center leaves the data center site, it typically has to go underneath roads or pavements. So these typically have to be dug up, pipes installed, and then covered over afterwards. And then that takes the heat to the end customers. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I wanted to just really briefly talk about this exciting opportunity that we have well, we're actually a live project. So we have a project that's heating the heat of the Olympic pool in summer for the Paris Olympics. So this is a project that started exporting heat this year, about 6 megawatts of heat. And yeah, we did a lot of press about this. So please do go and check out the video. It's about 8 minute video that you can click on and go and watch. Provides a great overview of heat export and the project in general. But just as a summary, this is a partnership. So we work closely with ENGIE, which is an energy company out in France. I think they also operate in the US actually as well. And then also SMIREC, which is basically a collaboration between ENGIE and the local municipality. So this is a great example of a local authority or municipality or city getting involved to make these projects happen. They went as far as providing some of the funding. They also provided some of the buildings that would connect in, as in the public buildings, for example, yeah, the Olympic pool and other new developments. So they made it a requirement for new buildings that were being built to be able to take heat from the heat network, the district energy system in the area. So they were really instrumental in helping bring this together. Yeah, and so this project is expected to save about 2,000 tons of CO2 every year and is supplying about the equivalent of about 1,000 homes. And that's sort of typical of most sort of data center heat export projects, I would say. Next slide, please. Yeah, so where are we doing this already? So currently we have, well, it's just over, well, slightly more than 1,200 now. It's probably closer to 1,500 homes equivalent being supplied by heat from our heat network. So we've got the Paris one, which I just mentioned. We've got 3 sites in Helsinki, and then we've got one in Toronto in Canada as well. And so with contracted, we've got about 5,000 homes worth. So that in the next few years would be expected to export heat to the equivalent of about 5,000 homes. So as Bob mentioned earlier, this is part of a global program. The focus has been in Europe because of the regulatory pressure, but we're very keen to develop projects as well in the Americas. Next slide, please. So yeah, very importantly, what are the successful ingredients that make up a heat export project? So there's a few of them I'll touch on very briefly. One is there has to be a mix between the amount of heat that's available from the data centers and the demand. So if you've got loads and loads and loads of heat, but very little usage for it, then it probably means that the scheme may not be viable. Conversely, you might have a bit of heat from the data center, but it's really not enough to satisfy the demand that's out there. It's probably not going to be an issue in North Virginia because there's a huge amount of data centers out there, but it's just something to think about. There needs to be that sort of matching between the supply and the demand. Another one is partnership is really key. As data center operators, we don't want to be responsible for designing, constructing, and operating district energy systems. As Preston mentioned before, it's a whole separate business model would require specialist skills. So we look for partners who will help take the heat from our data center and then distribute it to the community. The local authorities and the cities also have a really key role. We've seen that NVRC have produced this map, which is a great start to being able to identify where are the buildings, where are the public buildings. So there's a really key role for actually bringing the heat load together and making sure there's enough heat demand to basically justify a project. Um, I'd say that the third one is heat network. So either a planned or existing heat network. That's what we typically look for in Europe. I'd say in the US, it's more a case of there's going to be a need to create new heat networks and create business cases for them, which brings me nicely onto the last bit, the economics. The economics have to work for all parties concerned. So as a data center, we do have to make some investment to make the data center able to export heat. We have to invest in the heat exchanger. We have to invest in pipe work to connect from the cooling system. And that can be anywhere from, you know, half a million dollars, anywhere up to $5 million, depending on the project. So there is some investment that's needed. So there has to be enough heat to be exported to justify that. And equally for the utility or whoever's going to operate the district energy system, they have to know that they've got enough heat coming from the data center, but they've also got enough customers on the other end of the pipe who are going to buy the heat to justify the investment. Because again, it's going to be millions, probably millions of dollars to create a heat network, or what we're calling here today a district energy system. Next slide, please. So yeah, so I think this one is the last slide I wanted to present today. I just wanted to give a sense of scale. So this is based on a study um, via the Reuse Heat project that was done in 28 countries of the EU. And it was estimated that there's about 77 terawatts of data center waste heat that could be used for the community. And for context, that could supply heat to the equivalent of about 8 million homes across the EU. So there's a massive potential out there. I'd say there's probably less than, in total, all the heat network schemes in Europe is less than probably 10,000 homes. So you can see even in the EU where it's much more of a developed, it's not a new sort of thing to do district energy systems. There's still very little penetration out there and a huge scope for expanding that. And the same will be, yeah. So that's what I wanted to share, just to give people that sense of scale. So again, Northern Virginia, huge amount of data centers that have a huge amount of heat, but then we now need to see, okay, do those planets align? Are the ingredients there to make heat export happen here? So I think that's all I wanted to cover. Yeah, perfect. And it'd be great to get any questions as well.
Great.
Okay. Go ahead, Dale.
I was going to say we got our first question already. It's directed towards Preston. It's from an old friend. And the question is, could you please address whether there would be SEC jurisdiction over a district energy system solely on an entity's own contiguous property? such as a school campus or private development. In other words, where the district energy system and property could be under common ownership. Doesn't it appear that this would not be a public utility, but essentially the same as any campus energy system, such as one that are found on many college campuses?
Yeah, and I've mentioned the Harrisonburg James Madison University example. I think there's a similar example, and this would be federal ownership, but the Quantico Marine Base may have a district energy system or a similar system. Um, I would like to research that a little bit more for putting something out there that I'm not entirely clear on in terms of common ownership versus and what SEC oversight there might be. I'll report
Um,
back.
Good. There was a question whether we will post the slides. Yes, we'll post them online, and then we will email the link to everybody that was attending the webinar. We have two questions for Noah. Where specifically in Toronto was the particular project to which you were referring in the slide?
Yeah, I was just gonna get the exact one, so bear with me and I'll drop that one in.
Great. While you're finding it, there's a follow-up question, which is one ex heat exchange method better than in any other in your experience with working with district energy and data centers?
I'm not exactly clear as to what the alternative methods that this person might be alluding to. Um, I would, yeah, so I think, I mean, there's different ways of um, yeah, there's different types of heat exchangers that you can get. The one I showed was a flat plate heat exchanger. I would say that's the fairly typical um, type of mechanical design. There are heat exchangers out there, but that's the one that you'd use. Um, yeah, so I think there's a kind of standard way of doing these things, and this is not a new. It's quite a mature kind of technology. It's just that it's being applied to a new sector. So I'd say it's going to be fairly standard approach for doing heat exchange projects most times.
There was a follow-up, which was, is a district energy system required for heat exchange, or can it be incorporated and integrated within an existing utility provider's work? And I guess this is directed both to Preston and to Noah, but perhaps more towards Noah.
Happy to take a start. So is a district energy system required for heat exchange? Um, I think that makes it easier if there's an existing heat network or district energy system. Can it be incorporated with existing utility providers? I suppose yes, it can if that utility provider also operates these types of systems. So that's typically the case. So our Paris project, NG is the existing utility provider. They provide gas, they provide electricity, but they also build, own, and operate district energy systems.
There was a follow-up question, which is, Noah, any kind of idea on the upfront and reoccurring costs to a locality to implement a district energy system? But please chime in, Brian, Preston, if you have any experiences with that particular issue.
I'll go first, and Noah will provide the more
Sure.
expert response. But I think it depends. I hate to give one of those "it depends" answers. We don't have a lot of experience in Virginia, but it will depend on the upfront infrastructure that needs to be created, whether it's a private and or publicly owned, public, private, and or public and private owned entity, and what parties bring what capital and other costs to the table. Uh, Often local governments can achieve lower financing costs than the private sector using Virginia Resources Authority or other such entities. Noah, do you have a more expert answer on costs?
Sure. Yeah, I guess it really depends on the size. I'm also going to start with it depends. So I'd say on the smaller end of the spectrum, I was thinking, how many homes was this? A few thousand home scheme. Just thinking about previous projects I worked on, there can be like 10 to 20 million dollars to build out from scratch a new heat network. Because this includes buried pipe work, but it also includes typically there's also a backup plant that's built. so that in case there isn't heat from the data center, there'll be alternative means to generate. So you're looking about 10 to 20 million. On the very other end of the scale, I'm looking at very big projects, but these are like city scale. One project is going to be about 200 million, or euros in this case, but roughly equivalent in $200 million. But that's going to be quite a massive project, and that's 10 kilometers from the data center campus to the city. So you're probably looking, yeah, probably more in the range of anywhere between 5 million to $20 million, I think, for a district energy scheme. It'll be much less if you look at, for example, just taking the heat from across the road. Then it may not cost as much, but that's kind of much more smaller scale. If it's just next door building and maybe one or two buildings, then the cost would come down accordingly.
Another follow-up for Equinix. Have you looked at the use of absorption chilling to expand the load served to more of the year and not just heating space and water?
Yeah, so something that we're looking into more in the context of much larger sites that are going to be built in response to the market push for AI. I'd say though for like regular sites, it doesn't really make sense at the moment. It's an inefficient way basically to generate cooling essentially. So we've kind of focused on being 100% renewable for the power that we use for the cooling system. But yeah, we'd look at different use cases of absorption cooling, but it doesn't make sense in the kind of just in the day-to-day operation of a data center site. It's kind of a special use case.
Another fairly technical question. We've heard that data centers might be moving away from water cooling models and towards atmospheric cooling in response to concerns of water consumption. Is this rumored trend true, and wouldn't that preempt opportunities to establish district energy systems? It's open to both of you.
So Noah can answer the technical piece, but generally speaking, yeah, some of the big hyperscalers do have water net positive sustainability goals by 2030, meaning in various ways they're going to be either replacing or fully offsetting their water use. Cooling systems and data centers are getting increasingly advanced, going to precision cooling or water cooling on the chips themselves. And that's especially true
Oops.
for existing data centers, and Virginia has about 300 of them. It may be more difficult to retrofit existing data centers for the newfangled cooling systems, water cooling systems, than incorporating the new technology into to be built data centers. Noah can correct me where I have misstated.
That's yeah, agree with that. I would just add that I would say that we're not. It's not a one or the other. I think sustainability is very location specific. So you might have some markets like in Spain and Madrid in particular, which are water stressed environments. And in those situations, then would move away from using water because of that resource constraint in that particular location. However, in other areas where that's not an issue, then we would use water-based cooling. So I think that the broader context is that we've got to balance against all of these different sustainability initiatives depending on the local environment. And one of the things that we're working on is a metric that can connect between the water usage, the power usage, and then the heat export as well. Because one thing, for example, that people may not necessarily consider is that power from the local grids can also have a water usage content. And so we can end up looking at just one characteristic and very honing in on it and using that to kind of say whether a site is sustainable or not. I think that's an oversimplification. We have to kind of look at the local situation, understand what resources are available, what constraints are available, and then put in the best approach there.
Great, thanks. And it digs next. What's the ideal heat off-taker? How close should their facility be located to the data center, and what industries, um, oops, what industries or sectors are ideal?
Um, okay, so ideal heat off-taker. I guess the ideal scenario is that you have a district energy system that's already existing and it runs outside your data center, and that's the lowest cost scenario to plug into. Um, I would say the ideal off-taker is probably a district energy system because they'll supply various buildings, which means that much you'll have much more of a smoother load profile throughout the year versus, for example, a scenario where you might say, I'm going to supply one building next door and relying only on one that. So you've got a diversified demand. Um, yeah, I mean, people talk a lot about swimming pools. They can be good, though a data center will produce way more heat than could be used by the swimming pool. Um, but yeah, if it's like the Olympic Aquatic Center, that's good. If you've got a large scale environment like that. But really, it's district energy systems are probably the best way to use the heat from data centers.
Great. And then somebody asked, is it more common for a large tech company like Microsoft, Google, or Amazon to use Equinix to establish the infrastructure and then lease or acquire the building? Or do these larger companies also build and maintain their own buildings, including the DES infrastructure? Any difference in approach in your experiences in Europe versus that which you've seen or observed in the United States?
Sure. Um, so there's a mixture of approaches that those hyperscalers would use. So yeah, I'm talking about the Microsoft, Googles, and Amazons in the world. Sometimes they will do self-build, and sometimes they will lease from companies such as us. So they'll lease from other data center operators as well, and it might be a little bit of space in a multi-tenant co-location data center, or it could be the whole building, as I mentioned before. So I think it really depends on their own kind of growth strategies as to what they'll do. So they'll sort of pick and mix their approach. They'll do some of their self-build, but they may have limited capacity to build to keep up with the speed of growth that they want to attain. And so then they might rely more on companies such as Equinix to build the data center and lease it from us. So I think that approach is fairly consistent across the different markets.
Preston, any thoughts to follow up on that or no? Vanessa Rice asks, can we get a link to the white paper? I posted in the chat box, but I'm not sure if it got through. But at the end of the webinar, I think as early as Thursday, we'll send the slides and a link to the white paper to everybody. Nicole Keller asks, can you talk more about the heat pump stage, step 5, in the DES model? How does that work to raise the temperature of the water? Where does the energy for that come from?
Sure. So the heat pumps, so typically, I don't know what it is in Fahrenheit, so I'll have to work in Celsius, but typically the heat from a data center is about 30 degrees Celsius. And then some swimming pools might be able to use that directly. So we're looking at a project where the swimming pool literally happens to be next door. And so we might be able to use it at 30 degrees to heat the pool. However, most other uses, for example, to heat homes and other businesses, will probably need heat that's 60 or 70 degrees Celsius. So what a heat pump will do basically is raise the temperature of the heat. And it does that by using electricity. It's kind of like a fridge, how your fridge operates in reverse. And yeah, so you need some power in. So you probably need typically 1 unit of electricity to to generate about 3 or 4 units of heat, essentially.
In Loudoun, could Dulles Airport be a good potential recipient in the district energy system, or are they more likely to have waste heat of their own? Because this is directed first to Preston.
Could be. Depends on, proximity to the airport and the facilities as well. The greater the proximity, the nearer the proximity, the better. And I would imagine an airport could have its own waste heat, but I'm not an expert in airports.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess it depends. I think again, like these district energy systems are quite specific. So, if I was going to look into Dulles Airport specifically, I would want to know, well, how much heat do they use during the year? And there must be also quite a lot of air conditioning. And so I'll be looking to see if they recycle any heat that they use, for example, from the air conditioning system, to balance it out. So I guess it's potentially, but I'm not familiar personally of district energy schemes for airports. But it doesn't mean it's not possible.
Yeah, that's a nice segue into a question that I had actually, Noah and Preston, which is, I guess, first directed to Noah. Based on your experiences in places like Toronto and Helsinki, the case studies that you listed, is there sort of a similar set of attributes that just scream at you for Northern Virginia, where district energy could stand a very, very, very strong potential for being applied and developed, say, within the next 12, 24 months?
So I'd start by looking at the map that the NVRC has produced, and I would I think then it probably needs to find like a partner to come in and take a look and see those different loads. So see those different public buildings and see what the potential would be, and sort of work up a business case. So I would say that I haven't seen one that's really obvious for the whole district. I've seen some public buildings that are next to data centers, and it might be possible to use the heat there. But to look and say, okay, what about a wider scheme? We'll also have to look at also other buildings, not only the public buildings as well, to make it fly. So I think there's a piece of work to be done on that. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Preston.
Yeah, just quickly, it's my understanding that, for example, Arlington and Fairfax that are densely populated with structures, especially, have been looking at maybe using vacant office buildings to convert them to data centers. And if they are in a densely populated or neighborhood, and depending on public or private buildings that are nearby, that might be something to look at in the short term.
Yeah, and actually that's triggered a thought because there's also a movement in the planning authorities looking at actually, is it possible to locate data centers nearer to the built up areas, which is also a question for planning because if they're all kind of out of town and all the data centers together, then it makes it a little bit more difficult to make use of the heat.
I wanted to ask, you had in some of the earlier slides, Noah, a reference to the EU directives that they
Mm.
passed earlier this year. And my understanding is that they require data center operators in places like Germany and the Netherlands to measure energy efficiency, release metrics on greenhouse gas emissions, supplies of renewable energy. And I just wanted to ask you whether you felt free to comment on how that is going down, not just within Equinix, but in the broader data center community in Europe, and whether you could see possibly potential applications of maybe a similar set of data being shared in the United States.
Mm. Yeah, I'd say, I mean, I do a bit of cross-industry work around sort of regulations. And so I'd say, well, firstly speaking, as Equinix, we welcome sort of these regulations and the tracking of the information because it's a great place to start and sustainability is sort of key for us. I'd say others also I think it's a mixed bag because there's a lot of regulation going on, not just on the environmental side, but there's also data security regulations and yeah, there's all sorts, cybersecurity, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's quite a challenge for the data center industry, which has been kind of really kind of behind closed doors and didn't really publish a lot. So I think it's quite a change in culture within the industry to then now be providing all this information. So I think there's a bit of a transitionary period for that. But we certainly welcome the measurement, of information, and also for lawmakers to set a level playing field. It's a lot easier to lift up the whole industry if, say, lawmakers said, okay, now these are the requirements you need to operate at, versus, for example, Equinix say, okay, we're going to push further in this area, but then somebody else who doesn't want to be sustainable can still do that. And, so it makes more of a level playing field. So I think there's definitely scope in the US as well to borrow some of that approach in terms of regulation, because right now it's very difficult to know, for example, what's the power usage for data centers in Northern Virginia. I was doing some Googling before, and it was quite hard to figure out actually how much energy is being used, how much power is being used, and therefore how much heat is available. It was really quite tricky to do. So I think even just having that information would mean partners can come in and say, okay, I know how much heat there is from data centers. I know how much heat there is in community, and then they can work up a business case really quickly. Whereas now I think it needs a lot more work.
Okay. And Linda Stewart asks, I'm a small business, swim school owner. Our building is 12,000 square feet with 3 pools. We're looking to grow. How do you begin if interested in the data center partnership? Because that's for both Preston and for Noah.
Do you want to start, Preston?
Yeah, I haven't thought about that. First, we'd like to know where you're located, and you could email me or Noah or Dale or Bob and um, find a little bit find out a little bit more about your physical location and what's nearby, and we can perhaps approach a data center owner or two and get some feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, the first, yeah, exactly. First step is where are you? But there's also, I don't know if I can put in the chat, there's a link that will shows you all of the Equinix data center locations as well. So if it's just use a rule of thumb within a kilometer, for example, then it's certainly something we can look at. Otherwise, yeah, it might be a case of pointing you to another data center operator if they happen to be closer by.
No, once you send that link to Bob and me, and we'll post it with along
Yeah,
with
yeah, sure.
slides.
Happy to do that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Um, yeah. So I'd say typically as well, it does take there needs to be some sort of investigation of your particular location to understand what's the existing heating system that you're using. And then if you wanted it to take heat from a heat network, there may be some retrofitting that might be needed, and that there may be a cost associated with that. So there are those sort of things. And then the other things to think about is, connecting between the data center and your particular location. Again, this is probably where it is possible to do it private to private, but it might be useful to have a partner who can navigate going under the public highway and all the permits that might be needed for that as well. So that's just some things to think about.
Great. Any other questions?
Well, again, thank you everybody for your participation. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Preston, for your time and effort on this. Look, we've been at this for 15 years. Northern Virginia is certainly ripe for a pilot. That's why we built the map. There are a number of public facilities located next to data centers in Northern Virginia. There are more data centers under construction that will be even closer to new public facilities that are being considered and being built. Greenfield may be easier than a retrofit. On our part, we will be looking to engage a partner in taking a look at a standard public building and what it would take to bring district energy to it in terms of cost, etc. Just we believe that we just can't sit back, curse the darkness, and say, "Woe is me." Now is the opportunity to do something meaningful. And I want to thank you again, Preston and Noah, and to the team at Equinix. Thank you for being very public in your interest in partnering with our local governments here. We consider Northern Virginia the innovation region of the Commonwealth, and this is where this should happen before anywhere else. So with that, the slides and the video will be posted on Thursday on our website, novaregion.org. Look under the Resilience Hub and then click on the Resiliency Planning button, and you will find the links to the webinars. And thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Take care,
Thanks, Bob.
everybody. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.